Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic 90s Goosebumps television show. This episode came out in season 2. It was directed by Craig Price and written by Dan Angel and Billy Brown. And the episode in question is Calling All Creeps. Now, I have here a DVD which actually has Calling All Creeps included on this Scarecrow Walks at Midnight collection. So I'm going to be holding this up for a point of reference for this review. So I mentioned in my book review of Calling All Creeps that when I was a kid, I had acquired a handful of home recorded VHS tapes from my neighbor, and she had a handful of episodes, I believe. I think she had The Girl Who Cried Monster, Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, and this episode. And this was one of my absolute favorites from those VHS tapes that I acquired from her. And while I watched all three a lot, this one probably got the most play from me. And this was my introduction to the story Calling All Creeps before I ever read the book years later when I was in middle school, because I got the tapes when I was in elementary school. And for years, because it's been a while since I've read Calling All Creeps and watched the episode kind of together in the same fashion, over the years I kind of put it in my brain that this episode was mostly faithful to the book. And while it kind of is, this time around, I was able to see more flaws in this episode than I had previously. And honestly, I don't love it as much as I did when I was younger anymore, sadly. Now, this episode has a very all over the place reputation in the community. There's some people saying that this is one of their favorite episodes of the entire show. There are some people who say that they love this equally as much as the book. And then there's some people who have some issues with it. And I think a lot of the issues this episode has probably have to deal with how this episode came to be. So, in season 2, this story, along with a handful of others, I think The Blob They Did Everyone was on this, list of episodes here. Vampire Breath and Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns as well, including Calling All Creeps, were 4 episodes that the TV show got in advance before the books were ever finalized and published, meaning that Calling All Creeps' episode was wrapped up in filming months before the book would release. And the episode, I believe, came out the same month that the book did. Now, when you look at stuff like The Blob They Did Everyone, I believe that episode came out quite a few months before the book released. And then the same story revolves around Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns and Vampire Breath, I believe. They both came out in or around the same time that the book's counterparts did. So I think the main issue with this episode, kind of like its brethren, was that the show only had so much to work with in advance. So they probably had a mildly detailed outline to work with, and they had to fill in the blanks. And that could possibly explain some weird changes they decided to roll with here. Or maybe that's just Dan Angel and Billy Brown's writing kind of playing a role in this. Maybe Craig Price is directing. I couldn't tell you. But in my opinion, I don't think this episode is nearly as good as the book counterpart. But I will say that I do like this episode, and I would go out of my way to recommend that you watch it, especially if you're a massive Goosebumps fan and you're a fan of the 90s show, and you for some reason have never checked out Calling All Creeps, or it's been a long time since you've seen it. Go check this episode out and see what your thoughts on it are these days. So with that out the way, let's get into the episode's plot overview without giving too much away. So, like the book counterpart, or I guess in some ways unlike it, the episode starts off with a narration from the main character, Ricky. And Ricky, he is supposedly still in middle school in this version of the story. I know in the book he's in 6th grade. I don't know what grade he is in this, but he looks a bit aged up. Maybe he's in 7th or 8th grade. And we're pretty much in the first chapter of the book when the episode begins. Like in the book, Ricky was, leaving his house, going to his school so he can sabotage this girl named Tasha. But in the episode, we cut out pretty much the first 40 pages of the book, and we just get right into the nitty gritty of Ricky performing this prank of revenge, let's just say. So Ricky, he stands on a flower pot and looks inside the window and sees that this girl Tasha and a fellow teacher that works at the school are leaving the classroom where the computer is that is responsible for the school newspaper. So Ricky enters a window nearby in complete darkness and heads over to the computer and starts messing around the file and puts the iconic prank that everybody knows from Calling All Creeps, if you've experienced it before. Calling all creeps, call this number after midnight, blah, 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 and contact this person. Well, he tries to put Tasha's name and puts the message in on the computer and shuts it down. And once he's done, he hears the door nearby start to creak. So he panics and tries to leave out the window. And he's hanging on for dear life with his jacket, trying to be inconspicuous. But once Tasha enters the room, she realizes that she didn't turn the computer off and doesn't remember that she closed out of the file. And when she hears a noise by the window, she looks over and sees there's muddy footprints near the window, implying that somebody has come in to try to sabotage her, which gives her the cue to maybe go back behind what happened and double check everything. So Ricky, thinking that he got away with getting back at Tasha, heads back home and goes to school the following day. But unlike the book counterpart, Ricky in this version of the story is way more aloof and wimpy compared to his book counterpart, and he's very depressing for some reason in this version. I don't know if that was the actor's decision or maybe the producers or the writer or the director kind of coaching him to be this way, but it's not as great as the Ricky we got in the book, but still serviceable here. Ricky is getting bullied at his locker in front of his peers, and he looks sad and depressed and very mopey. And then some random girl that he's never met before comes over and gives him an act of kindness by introducing herself and befriending him. And this is the character we know as Iris. And Iris is a new girl looking to make friends and, have somebody to eat lunch with and whatnot. And Ricky seems to be all on board on that and wants to show her around the school and eat lunch with her. So he shows her around the school a little bit, and then it's time for lunch, and they head to the cafeteria. And when they go to the cafeteria, he notices that there's some odd behavior going on from these bullies that normally like to torment him. And they aren't really coming after him at the lunch table. And he seems to be mildly thrown off by this, but he doesn't think too much of it. And he heads home. And come to find out that in the paper, after he explained to Iris that he got this revenge on Tasha for being horrible and how he has a plan to get back at his bullies, she tries to call him and warn him to check the paper because something might have gone wrong with this plan. And it's after midnight, and he's starting to get calls from these mysterious anonymous people saying that, hey, I'm a creep, tell us the plan, blah, 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 what you expect if you know the story. So Ricky, being too tired and it being after midnight, he decides to hang up the phone and leave it off the hook and get some shut-eye. Well, the next day, he comes to school and sees that Iris is very apologetic for him, but he also notices that in the hallway, Tasha is extra mean to him and tells him that she got him back for trying to get her and that his plan is ruined. But his bullies seem to be nice to him and like giving him a pat on the back and giving him a thumbs up at lunch. And he's like, something's off here. And turns out he's starting to get these messages. Like he's getting a note passed to him saying, when is the meeting? And he has, like the book, a paint message in his locker asking when is the meeting, right? And this builds up to a point of the story where Ricky is taken by a group of individuals and brought into a place in nearby, I guess the nearby woods. and they make their presence known that they are the actual creeps that have been calling him after midnight. And it's only made worse that they're getting increasingly more pissed off because Ricky has to leave his phone off the hook at night because he's getting tele-harassed. So they, once they make their presence known, they reveal to Ricky that they are indeed who they say they are, and they show their true forms, and they have these seeds, so to speak, that they need to use before they expire, kind of like the book. Now, while I didn't go over this in my book review, this is as far as I'm going to go with that, because if I go any further, I'm going to spoil the story for you. But essentially, Ricky now has to deal with whoever these people who claim they're, or have shown him that they are creeps. He has to go along with the plan or expose himself that he might be a fraud, so to speak. And this plays a role by the end of the story where he has to kind of reap the decisions that he helps sow with these individuals. And he comes to a harrowing conclusion along with his friend Iris on something that he feels is the right thing to do. And it's kind of shocking, maybe just as shocking, if not even more, given the context of Iris being there, unlike the book. But I'm just going to leave it at that. And that's, in a nutshell, what you're going to expect out of the episode Calling All Creeps. So I'm going to say this off the bat, because episodes have a visual medium and have an extra dimension than their books, there are some extra elements I'm going to touch on, like I normally do with these episodes. But I'm going to say this up front for this episode. Kind of like the book, not really having the greatest atmosphere or whatnot. And because this show is low budget and it does have its issues, I guess I'll go ahead and start with the negatives, because I think the negatives are more pronounced than my positives for this episode. I feel like that getting this episode, I guess, script this far out in advance, or whatever they had to work with before the book ever released, I feel like that didn't do this episode the best justice in the world. Whether we're talking about, the creeps morphing, that is definitely played up in the cheap budget that the show it doesn't. Pretty much every episode that involves people transforming into monsters or creatures, it's evident here, and it looks really bad. Whether we're talking about how the character Ricky is written, I have a really big problem with Ricky in this episode, I think more than most people, because I think in the book, he's written in such an honest and relatable way, and he kind of defies the archetype of being a nerd character in Goosebumps. He's not melodramatic and he's not over dramatized, you know what I mean? But in the episode, it's the opposite of that. I feel like he's very over dramatized and flamboyant in being just a wimp, and he's pretty much pathetic. I mean, I don't know what else to say. He just doesn't come across like the Ricky that I liked in the book counterpart. And in a lot of ways, he kind of feels not that relatable, but he feels still weirdly empathetic given his situation. And you're made to feel bad for him, but I feel like it's done to an extreme extent here. And I feel like it's kind of forced, and it rubs me the wrong way in that aspect. And getting down to some more negatives here. This is in every stretch of the word condensed. This is one of the more clearly evident condensed episodes you will ever come across in Goosebumps. If you've read the book, you obviously know the first 40 pages are completely axed out of the episode. It gets pretty much right down to where page 40 in the book started, and it just picks up from there, and that's essentially what they chose to adapt. But at the cost of that, you don't really capture the secret sauce that the book had, which was Ricky's monologue. And the closest thing I can compare to this episode is Night of the Living Dummy 2's episode from season 1. While that episode is not terrible by any means, it's severely held back by not having Amy's monologue there. And Amy's monologue really made that book shine and made it what it was. I would argue the same thing for Calling All Creeps happened here. It doesn't translate as well as the book does. It definitely isn't as, well written by any means. And I feel like the book just had a lot more to offer with Ricky's character and his experiences. And that goes into all the other events that happen in the story. I feel like in the book were a bit more spectacle-ish, and it felt like a better build than what the episode was able to provide. It just felt like, I don't know, a spiritless version of what the book is. And I just felt like I was watching a hollowed out version of a book that I really loved in a lot of ways. And that made me really sad while watching it this time around. And I can be honest about this. Like majority of these episodes from this show, the acting can be hit or miss. And I will say the actors who played the creeps in this episode were not that good. They were not that good. And even the ADR dubbed voice acting of the creeps does not sound good either. And yeah, I know a lot of people like to beat over the head the yellow creeps of the episode. Yeah, it's not purple creeps like you get in the book. Actually, I have the book on hand here. They're purple. In the episode, they're yellow. So, yeah, there's that. And there's some odd changes here outside of that. Like, they got rid of a creep in the book that was in the book. I think he was Jared. But normally they axe out a character when they're trying to conserve budgets. So I'm not going to be a stickler on that and actually deduct on that. But, there's stuff here that you can noticeably see that is a sacrifice from the book and the material that was in the book into translating it into an episode. And now, I don't know how much of the content they had available at the time they made it, because, like I said, they made this episode before the book was ever finalized and evidently ever released. So they had a bit of a leeway ahead of the book's release schedule to kind of work with, but I couldn't tell you what they picked and choose from this supposed draft or outline or whatever they had laying around, or what was new ideas that was brought to it. I couldn't tell you, but in my opinion, those negatives really did drag it down, and these negatives were just not in the book. And now some of these are attributed to having that visual medium that episodes have, and that's kind of unfair to compare that, but because the episodes have that, I feel like I have to include it and be fair, because if you can open up a book and it can have a hologram of itself and display images or whatnot, you would feel compelled to scrutinize those things as well. So anyways, those are the negatives. And I guess I'll get into the positives, I guess, here. Here's some things I really enjoyed about the episode. First and foremost, I think the design of the creeps, I actually prefer over the book. Yeah, Tim Jacobus' art is iconic. The phone booth with the purple creeps is cool. But I think the yellow creeps are way better in terms of design. Yeah, they look kind of goofy with their big heads, and putting the big head prosthetics on the kids look kind of goofy. But I dig the design and the look of them a whole lot more. I like that they look more like dinosaurs than lizards. I don't know what it is about it, but I weirdly like that change. When it comes to the plot, you have a good amount of what made the book kind of eventful and kind of tense. There's some moments in the story that they do capture from the book kind of well. And there are some fun little changes that they made here to kind of make it worthwhile to visit over the book. Like the food in the book that kids hated to eat was macaroni and cheese. But in the episode, they decided to go with, I think, tuna surprise. And there's a fun little joke to be had there, and I thought that was kind of amusing. And for what it's worth, I think the actor who played Ricky didn't do a bad performance given the material he was given. And I think Iris, who is a series regular, I think she was in Haunted Masks episode. I know she was in Cry of the Cats episode. I don't know her name, forgive me. But she was pretty good as Iris, and her friendship with Ricky seemed genuine. And I think she brought a lot of that sweet nature that Iris had in the book out in her character. And in a lot of ways, I think Iris is way more likable here in some aspects than she was in the book. And I think the ending of the episode was by far, I think, more elevated in terms of being more poignant of what it's trying to say. Like its book counterpart, this is more of a not necessarily a commentary like the book, but it does have its themes and its commentary notes in it that are still prevalent in the book, just not as pronounced. But I think the ending here is what the book should have had, or something like it. It's more closer to what I would have preferred. And I like the addition of having Iris there. It just adds to the moral weight of what's going on. And I think it's more warped for that because, you know, a choice that our main character Ricky has to make is pretty crucial and hardcore when you sit down and think about it. And I don't know. I just think that that inclusion helps elevate it. Now, there is one thing about the twist that I don't like. This is one last negative I can throw at it. So, the creeps believe there's an aspect to it. I guess I have to kind of share this to give you some context of where I'm coming from. The creeps believe that Ricky is their leader. And Ricky is already a creep himself. And he's tried proving himself and has convinced the creeps multiple times in the story he is who they believe he is. But at the very last note of the story, one of the creeps hand Ricky a cookie. And if you don't know what I mean by a cookie, these cookies were tainted by these creep seeds that turn people into creeps. And I'll just leave it at that. And I was blown away by how just stupid that came across this time around. Because I'm like, wait a minute. If they already know that Ricky, or at least believe Ricky is a creep, then why are they giving him one of these tainted cookies to turn him into one? It just, why? Why? I guess they needed that there to kind of bridge in actual context of how he's able to do a certain thing that the episode ends off on. But it's just so silly and dumb that I think it detracts from that decision that Ricky makes at the end and kind of holds it back at the same time. So take that for what you will. At the end of the day, Calling All Creeps' episode, I guess, was perhaps a lesson to be had. Some people might disagree with this, and that's totally fine. But I think the lesson was the show, at this point, season 2, was already starting to show a big flaw in their methodology. And that flaw was they wanted desperately to have episodes come out exclusively for the show, which ultimately would be turned into books as well. And they thought that this would be a good cross-promotion thing for, Fox Kids or YTV in Canada to get these stories ahead of time, being able to produce them way before the books come out. So that way they can put the episodes out right when the books come out or right around the time that they would, right? But they ended up shooting themselves in the foot because if kids go and see Calling All Creeps episode and they look at the cover and they look at the synopsis, they're like, I've already seen that book. Why do I need to go read it? And not only that, if kids saw perhaps or maybe read the book and then watched the episode, I can totally understand if kids read Calling All Creeps and thought that was their favorite book and they come to the episode and they're like, why is Ricky more of a wimp? Why are the creeps yellow? Why does this feel like a downgrade? I can understand that too. And Calling All Creeps is definitely a prime example of that phenomenon that happened in that 90s show, and perhaps one of the major reasons that led to its downfall at the end of the day. But this is a fan-revered episode, and a lot of people seem to love it, and that's totally fine. I just don't love it as much as other people do. And if I'm being honest, if I had to rate this thing from a 0 to 5 star basis, I don't even think I'm going to give this episode a B, to be honest. I just think that this pales in comparison to how the book makes me feel about this story. Yeah, you have the skeleton of the book here, but you don't have the muscle, you don't have the flesh, you don't have the complexion, and you don't have the personality that the book had. But that doesn't change that this is a good episode, at least for this show's standards. So I'd probably give this a high C, given the negatives I have with it, and I'll give it like a 3.9 out of 5 stars. It's a C+. It's pushing a B-, but I think those dumb issues that the episode has just kind of sink it further. Maybe if the twist didn't have that dumb angle with the cookie, this might have scored maybe a 4.1, maybe a 4.2, but That's just straight up stupid crap, and I hate it when the show does that blatantly obvious dumb crap. So that's why I have it here. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Calling All Creeps episode. Let me know down in the comments section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.